download the newest version of Soundvision to get the latest version of Autofilter. Joachim joining us from, it looks like, somewhere just in a secret room, probably next to R&D. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct in Marcoussis.
Fantastic. Joachim, you work in the R&D department. What is your specialty in the R&D department?
So I'm head of the acoustics research team. So we are mostly working in fields such as algorithm, simulation, and finding new technologies for the products.
Oh, that's really exciting. So you're the pointy end of the sword that's helping us to discover where the industry is going, how to take the best technology and push the envelope even further.
That's one way to say it, yeah.
Excellent. And the star of the webinar the last few months, Sam Proctor, you're joining us from, it looks like, your home office in, where are you again?
That's correct. This is my home office in York in the UK.
Fantastic, Sam. It's great to see you. You are within the application design team, and you specifically work on what exactly?
That's correct. So we effectively take all of the clever stuff that Joachim's department, R&D department, do, and effectively put it into the software and make it user-friendly and into the end product that you guys use.
Really cool. So today we're talking all about a brand new version of Autofilter. So if you guys don't remember that the Autofilter tool that you use now and love actually came out with a whole set of tools, the Auto Solvers, in 2019. And the Auto Solvers are a set of tools that have been designed to simplify, accelerate, and improve the process of system optimization. Starting with, very simply, the best mechanical deployment for your variable curvature line source products. And this helps you find the best mechanical deployment on a given show. And then second, we have a tool, Autofilter, which up until just a week or two ago was able to unify and normalize the HF response across the audience. And now it actually does that full range. Is that correct, Joachim? It goes down to, how low is it going down?
A bit below 100 hertz.
So the filter now helps to optimize, normalize, and equalize. Is that a good way to say it?
I guess I would really put focus on homogeneity and also efficiency.
So homogeneity and efficiency to make the low end, the mid band, and the high frequency as consistent across the audience for a given array design. Exactly. Really cool. So, Sam, why do we want a tool like Autofilter at a general show? What's the purpose?
As was said, the idea is to try and increase the tonal homogeneity. We know we've been able to do this manually to some degree in the past. It can take, as a user, it can take quite a lot of hours to design an array, to optimize it, to try and get the best tonal response over the audience. However, previously we've been limited to just the high frequencies. With regards to an objective, we want it so that every person in the audience has the same tonal balance. If a mix engineer is mixing to one frequency response, it doesn't matter where someone is in the audience, we want them to experience exactly that same mix. So this is where a tool such as Autofilter really helps us.
Okay, that's really interesting, Sam. So, Joachim, how does Autofilter make it more consistent across the audience? What's maybe the simple way to explain what it's actually doing?
Okay, so maybe before answering what it is doing, we should just come back to the main challenges which we can experience in the low frequency range. In the high frequency range, it's pretty easy to control the sound field using the existing tool that we have, the FEAR plateau and the air comp filters. And we can follow the Spl target, which is defined by the user, keeping the same sonic signature everywhere in the audience. In the low frequency range, it's harder to control the sound field, mostly because the sound size compared to the wavelengths is much smaller, and then we have less control. And what you experience on site is several things. First, you can have what we call hotspots, which can be understood as a non-optimal orientation of the main low frequency lobe. At the end of the audience, you can have energy missing. And at the beginning of the audience, in contrary, you can have large or strong level with strong changes also in the frequency response, even cancellation for the worst cases. So I could say that more generally, sonic signature is not consistent at all. And so this is solved by the new full-range autofilter, which now uses high-resolution FIR filters, where we independently set magnitude and phase for each frequency. And that way, we can precisely control the sound field, even in the low frequency, where our standard FIR plateau and air comp have no effect.
So you said a couple of things there that I think we should really dig into, and they're quite interesting. And one word, is obviously this hotspot and also a word like simulation. So Sam, this sounds exactly like something we can probably visualize in Soundvision. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, that's probably the perfect place to start the beginning of the journey in Soundvision and go through the design stage as we have it today, and we can identify all of these issues that we previously faced. So what I have here is a very simple arena. We have a system in place. However, you'll see here that our main arrays still need designing here. So I'm going to hide everything and just keep with a main array. I've cheated for this demo and just put in 16 enclosures, and I've predefined a position. So hopefully to many of you, this isn't we're just going to go through the beginning, defining an objective in Autosplay. Hopefully this isn't new to the majority of you, but if it is, you'll still find this very informative.
I'll tell you what, we'll put a link in the webinar for all the other webinars on maybe how to get started in Soundvision. So just look below if you guys want, if you have any questions specifically on how to get started in Soundvision. Sorry to cut in there, Sam.
Perfect. So to begin with, we just need to double check that we can achieve our coverage. So we do this using the source cut view tool, and we can see what the source looks like over the venue on axis. And we just want to make sure that we're looking at between D max and D min. So this is the minimum depth of coverage. So all I'm going to do is bring this right to the front for this scenario. And then very simply, we click init to initialize the autosplay. So this is just checking the number of enclosures our source definition can achieve this coverage. And we can check that our coverage has achieved 100%. So this is step one. The second step is to actually define an objective. So the thing is, there's more to just looking at SPL over the audience when we define a source. And we do this using the SPL Target Window. So what we see is the frequency response over the depth of our source, and this shows it over 1 to 10 kilohertz. We also want to view the low frequency response. So here I'm going to select 80 to 250 hertz, and I'm just going to resize this scale. So now we see we have the LF frequency response over depth of the audience and the HF response. As Joachim said earlier, the low frequencies are much harder to control. So what we see here is actually the definition of the low frequencies over that distance, over that throw. And this is something that's not going to change too much. We said before that one of the main objectives is tonal homogeneity over the audience. So regardless of whether you're right at the front or right at the back, we want you to experience the same level of HF and LF. So to do this within our objective, ultimately, what we want to see is the distance between the LF and the HF curves are the same throughout the depth.
So if I see that right, the distance between the two says there's more low end, so maybe my system has a contour, right? Yes. But that contour is getting less loud in the back and the low end and also in the high end. So the whole thing is just moving down together. Is that kind of right? So if I walk further back in the venue, it'll sound the same. It'll just be less loud, right?
Correct. And I think a lot of people we've reached that stage where I think previously we just used to look at level with regards to designing. And of course, there's some degree to this. We obviously want intelligibility throughout our audience. This is priority. However, we don't want this difference in frequency response, in tonal response. Regardless of where we are in the audience, if we're right at the back and we have the same level, however, our low frequencies are 6 dB down compared to our HF, then it's not going to sound that great. We're going to have complaints.
Yeah,
it's not acceptable.
It's interesting, and I know me personally, but also experience-wise, I don't notice a level change over distance nearly as much as I notice a tonal shift, right? So if I walk to the back of a very large venue, but if the mix sounds the same, it's great. It's just less loud. I might actually enjoy that better than being up front. But if the bass is missing or the highs are too bright, it's very apparent and it's frustrating, right? So that's almost a bigger trigger, I would imagine, for most audiences than actual level.
Exactly, and that's very natural to assume. Obviously, it's easy to comprehend that you're far away from a speaker, so it's going to be quieter. We experience this in everyday life. However, if we get this tonal change, then it rings alarm bells that something's not good.
Got it.
So looking at this and looking at setting our objective, in the perfect world, we'll have this same distance between LF and HF. That means if we were to target the best homogeneity, we would simply match our HF target to our LF slope. However, as we previously said, we want to, number one, maintain that we have intelligibility, and we don't advise such a big level difference from front to back. Here we get something like 12 dB difference, which means the people in the front are obviously going to hear so much louder than the people at the back. We're going to get complaints again. So we do advise a 6 dB limitation from front to back. So there is a slight, if we bring this up, there is a slight compromise to make here with regards to the slopes that we go for.
Got it.
One thing to do, which I didn't mention before, is also to set deref. Usually we tend to think of this as the front of house position. So again, around maybe midway on the floor, depending on where this is. And you'll see, again, from moving this, it's just a little bit easier to match the slopes as well. So lastly, I'm actually going to jump ahead and just pull D-min down a bit, just to see if we can do something with this level at the front.
So what you're defining now is that at that reference position, maybe the mix, we only want it to get so much louder in the front of that, which makes sense. If I'm mixing at 100 dB, I don't want it to be much more than that going forward. So maybe the front row, you're saying it's going to be 101, 102 or something. That seems quite reasonable. And the back row, you're going to say it's going to be 96 or something like that. Is that right? 97.
Yeah.
That seems.
I'll probably pull that up a little bit because we have our limitation at the front. One of the things to note is when you open this, Soundvision does suggest a suitable starting point for this objective. So you may find you want to change the target a small amount. If you're cautious about wanting this level at the back, maybe you want to just increase the Dmax level and have a little bit more HF than LF as an active choice. But just so you know, it does provide a very good starting point. So with that set, we can now click Optimize on Autosplay. And you'll see effectively this is optimizing the interelement angles to try and best achieve our target.
So this is now this is the first step of those auto solvers for a variable curvature line source. And it's going to find the best mechanical deployment for your given criteria. And that's obviously a really important step to get started here, but I'm assuming that can only do so much. Is that right, Joachim?
Well, yes, we tend to consider that mechanical optimization is the first thing to optimize, but we know by experience that we have to go further. However, if you have the best mechanical deployment, what you will have to do then with electronic correction will be smaller. So this is the interest of this in the first optimization.
So I always think of food whenever I think of sound design, and I'm not sure why. But my thought always is if you buy a really good steak, it takes a little bit less salt and butter to make it perfect than if you buy maybe a less expensive steak. Sam, do you like that analogy? Does that work well?
Any analogy with food works for me, to be honest. No, that makes a lot of sense.
All right, so this makes sense. We start with a good mechanical design. We have to need just a little bit of salt, a little bit of butter, and it'll be perfect, right? If we have a more challenged design, electronics can sometimes save the day, but if the design is too far from the ideal, then there's a point where we cannot resolve that. Does that sound about right, Joachim?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's perfect.
Perfect.
So if we jump back into what AutoSplay has actually done here, we can see very quickly that actually the distance between our LF and our HF isn't bad for our audience coverage.
That's not too bad.
If we look at the things that stick out now, if we're talking about the best homogeneity, obviously we have this HF level at the very front of the audience. Our distance is very close from the array. We also notice that we have a lot less low frequency level in the near field as well. If we look at the shape of the LF frequency over depth, the LF level over depth, we see that we actually have this kind of hotspot around between 20 to 40 meters. And we'll see this when we map this in a second. And then the final thing to note is when we get towards the back of our very coverage, we see that actually our HF level is good, but our low frequency rolls off a little bit more. So if we're talking about tonal homogeneity, this is another point that we want to look at trying to improve upon. So that's where the electronic optimization comes into play. So in fact, we can, before we go on, just see what the results of this look like without doing anything else. So if I can remember what mapping setting this is at. Okay, so 80 to 400 hertz. So we're looking at the low frequencies, or low and low mid. And all I'm going to do here is just double click on the scale bar just to auto scale the mapping. So it's a nice quick shortcut. And this is where it gives us something to focus on. So we mentioned hotspot in the audience before, and we can see this with this large red area here. So this is where that main lobe is, that main energy. And we can see that actually we're missing energy in the front. We have this large hotspot, and then we tail off with energy towards the back. So without any low frequency optimization, this is the response that we get. And this is what we want to improve upon with the new autofilter.
And I suppose, too, if we think about where we define mix to be, we put mix kind of in the middle of that hotspot, right? So now that means if I'm an engineer, I'm hearing the most low end of the venue, not the average amount, right? So the tonal balance is almost more extreme because it's not a delta plus or minus, it's a delta just minus, right? Everywhere else in the venue, the low end goes down. So that's probably not the ideal situation. And if we had a solution, it would be even better than the way it is now, correct?
Correct, and that's the solution we're presenting.
Hey.
So the next step to using autofilter is to go to the electronic settings tab. And before we do anything, we need to define a unit type, so an amplified controller to use, and the number of enclosures we want to drive in parallel. The reason we have to select the amplified controller type is because depending on what amplifier we use, we may be limited on the number of enclosures we can drive in parallel. For example, here, if I select LA4X, we can only drive one enclosure per amplifier circuit. So we select this, and to begin with, I'm going to start with 2 enclosures in parallel per amplifier. I don't know about you, Scott. This is just my default preference to start with. It means you get the best of both worlds. So some good discretization versus
it's cost effective.
Cost.
Yeah, exactly. No, I tend to feel the same way. It'd be great to have one-to-one amplifiers to have all that perfect finesse, but I always wonder if it's worth all the extra money to do that, so it's always a challenge.
So this is, I would say, my default to start with. I'm just going to exit mapping mode. And then the nice thing is we're on to using Autofilter. If we come to the Autofilter frame, there's no option to do. There's no selection, no thinking about it. It's one button to calculate. And we shall do this now. So this is calculating the filters to use. And that's it. So you see, it's quite quick to implement. And we see we now have this label saying autofilter is active. We can see that the resources are used with regards to the groups frame. So let's actually look at the results of what this gives. And to begin with, we will use the Spl Target Window. So hopefully you can see this well. So if I bypass, remember I said we have low energy at the front. We have a hotspot around 20 to 40 meters where the low energy is at its highest. And then it tails off quite a lot towards the back. And with the new autofilter, we can see we have much more energy and a smaller delta between the hotspot and the near field. And actually, with regards to reducing the energy of the hotspot, it's actually spreading that energy out. So we end up ever so slightly shifting the energy towards the far field. And if I bypass again, the other result is it ends up slightly decreasing this slope of the SPL over distance, which means now the difference from HF to LF is much more consistent over the audience coverage.
So it looks to me like we're not actually losing energy, really. We're just kind of shifting where it's going. Is that a good way to think about it, Joachim?
Yes, and that's what these new filters offer, is the fact that you don't need magnitude and resource consumption to add some level in parts where you're missing it. So as Sam explained, both at the end of the audience and at the beginning of the audience, we could achieve more level just by steering or shaping the lobe with magnitude and also with phase. And just to precise about magnitude, why we're not using more resources, we force only negative magnitudes. So it means that whenever you're trying to shape in the low frequencies, you will not use any resource.
So the algorithm is processing, I believe you said earlier, FIR filters for amplitude and phase on each circuit to help steer the beam or steer the lobe, I guess that's a better way to say it, across the audience and shape it differently. And it does this without consuming resources. So more or less we have the same total power on the audience we had before. It'll just be less loud in some spots and more loud in others.
Exactly, yes.
Did I get that? Okay, I got that. That's really good. And one thing I've noticed, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're doing this two elements at a time. So we do not have to do this with one element per enclosure per DSP. Is that correct?
So that is absolutely correct. We are currently doing 2 enclosures parallel together. So 2 enclosures per amplifier circuit. And actually, we're not limited to 1 enclosure per circuit. We could try this with n parallel equals 1. We could do 3 enclosures per amp circuit as well. And in fact, we will demonstrate this after in fact, we can demonstrate that now. Nope. I'm gonna.
You're gonna pause.
I'm gonna make you wait for this.
We're gonna tease. That's after the commercial break, everyone. So if you want to come back for season 2 of Sam Proctor Explains Autofilter, please do that. If you want Sam to continue now, in the comments below here, go ahead and say, Sam, please hurry up. So that would be great. Well, Sam gets that going, Joachim. So how, up until today, I've always understood that we have to have just a lot of DSP to make this actually work. How is this within the algorithm work to have 2 or 3 boxes in parallel and still achieve results? Like what magic have you guys come up with in Marcoussis at R&D?
I'd like to say it's magic, but it clearly isn't. We don't need to have one DSP or one filter per enclosure to get good results, and Sam clearly states this. If you want to go more into details on how we do things, so as we said earlier, we use FIR filters, and we just try to find for each frequency the best magnitude and phase to match the target that we've defined before. And it's just an optimization algorithm afterwards that finds the best filters for each frequency. Now the goal, or maybe the core of the algorithm, is to define a correct objective. And this objective has several, I'd like to say sub-goals. The first, and it's very important, is that we try to maximize the level at the end of the audience. So this is the first step of the algorithm, and we steer the lobe so that we get maximum level at the end of the audience. And then, and only after then, we try to optimize the dispersion to get as close as possible to the target. The target looks like the Spl target that you have in high frequencies, but we have to adapt it in the low frequencies because we know that based on the source size, we cannot achieve it up to or down to 100 Hertz. Something that is not visible here in this window, but that we paid a lot of attention on, was to make sure that we do not degrade what's happening below or even behind the array. And it's pretty easy to do mistakes when you're not careful about this part, because it's when you're doing some phase shifts, because here we're talking about phase shifts, we know by experience that some lobes, out of axis lobes, can appear, and this can degrade what's happening for the artists in the scene or the people just in the neighborhood. And so we took a lot of attention in improving or at least not degrading what's happening below. And I guess this is it. And for the number of enclosures in parallel, it's up to you. If you want to, if you have the money to have one amplifier per enclosure or one channel per enclosure, that's fine. You will get good results. But we found out that you don't need it. And I guess maybe even with 3 enclosures, if your first design is okay, you could achieve very decent results.
So this is great. Like you're saying, we don't need to have one-to-one. We can surely try it. My question then, maybe Sam, you can show everyone, how do we quantify or qualify whether we should spend more money or we should save money? Is there a tool in Soundvision now that shows us that?
Yes, so the easiest way to actually assess the results of Autofilter is using the frequency response window. To make the organizing of my windows a little bit easier, I'm going to use just the predefined layout and the 2D source layout. So using this, we can see the source cut view, Spl target, and the frequency response all at the same time. So the big thing is having a look at the frequency response and the effect that Autofilter has on this. So I'm going to bypass to begin with. And currently there's a lot of curves. It's probably hard to see the detail here. So I'm just going to change the average on this so that we have one curve for every 2 meters in the audience. Should make it a little bit easier to look at. So with no optimization, this is what we see in the audience. We can see in our near field, we actually get these cancellations, which were mentioned earlier, at various different frequencies. And we can see that actually, although we have an approximate trend, each curve ever so slightly varies what its total response is. When we look at the results that Autofilter brings, we can see all of these cancellations are severely reduced. We can see that actually now we have a continuous trend with regards to the curves over the depth. And in terms of being able to assess the performance of this, we have, I would say, one view and a few tools which are absolutely key to being able to assess this properly. So I'm going to bypass again. And what we're going to do is we're going to fix at mean over 1K to 10K. So what this is doing is for all of these curves, it's going to overlap that. So the mean energy at 1 to 10K is effectively the same. What this is doing is giving us the frequency response, but removing the SPL difference over the depth of the venue. So we're not getting that SPL loss. We're just assessing the variance in the frequency response. So we'll look at that without optimization. And so this is what we get with the results just from AutoSplay. And actually we can see they're pretty good. Without any electronic optimization, we can see that from 1 kilohertz to 10 kilohertz, there's not too much variance. But as we go lower in frequency, we can see that, okay, each side, in fact, if we show the mean, each side of the mean, we have maybe 2 or 3 dB difference. And as we go lower in energy, we find that at certain places in the audience, we may have 6 or 7 dB difference just from the mean frequency response. So this is when we say it's not ideal. We could have the same response from 10 kilohertz down to 630 hertz, and then a severely attenuated low end.
And what we see there, actually, we see what's really common, I suppose, in larger arrays, which is, let's see if I can make my hand correct here. There we go, something. All right, we have a sheet of paper here. In a larger array, as you get near the bottom and you're listening down here at the bottom, the bottom of the array that you're hearing is this first information. The top is actually starting to cancel out, I suppose, thanks to wave line source array physics. And you get this notch or this actual cut in low end because the array is long enough. I suppose that's as the array gets really big, that starts to become more problematic. So we can reduce that problem. I'm assuming we can't perfectly eliminate it, right, Joachim? But we can make it far less severe and almost indistinguishable, that notch that happens near the bottom and the front of the array. And I can see that clearly here in a couple of those traces, Sam.
So the minute we activate Autofilter,
oh wow,
this is the result that this brings to the table. We can see that for any point throughout the audience coverage, we get
much more consistent. Yeah,
effectively 1 dB of variation down from, if we're looking here, around 8 kilohertz down to 150 hertz and even lower, which is such a significant improvement. It means although we have the SPL attenuation, the tonal response is the same. So that mix that the front of house engineers striving to achieve, working so hard in the conditions, will translate throughout the venue.
That's really
so
neat.
This is what Autofilter brings to the table.
Cool.
And using this view, this is where we can assess, actually, do we need to run enclosures on their own circuits? Or can we benefit from running 3 enclosures per circuit?
Oh, so sure, we could use these statistics, and it's showing us, is that standard deviation? Is it just the average we're seeing? What's the actual, Joachim? That's the standard deviation, I assume. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's close to standard deviation. So for those of you who don't know what standard deviation is, it evaluates the tonal variation on these 3 frequency ranges. The first one being up to 200 hertz, then between 200 hertz and around 1 kilohertz, and then up to 10 kilohertz. So for each frequency range, we try to evaluate the variation around the mean value. So we're not interested here in having in the absolute level difference. So we want to remove the absolute level difference and just check for a similar level if the sonic signature, if the tonal variation is the same. And here in this case, it's pretty impressive.
Got it. So I have an 8-year-old son, for those of you who have 8-year-old boys at home. he has a Nerf gun, so maybe we would have him shoot 100 Nerf bullets across his room, and we would figure out how they all hit, and we would standard deviation. We would kind of forget about the one or two that randomly went way off to the side, right? And we'd say, okay, the Nerf bullets always hit within this size circle. Is that pretty good? The one or two that are random, we just kind of forget about those.
I just love the images you're using since the beginning of this webinar. Yeah, it's good.
Good. Yeah, that works. So we forget about the one or two random, and then we say the rest of them are all within a circle that's maybe 10 centimeters in diameter. So he's got pretty good aim. So what I know is the likelihood of him shooting me as I run across the house is pretty high, and every once in a while he'll miss. So that's what we know. And this says the same thing. The high end, I can't quite read that on my screen, Sam, because it's early here for me. 1.6 dB plus or minus?
1.6.
Okay. And the mid is 0.9. Whew. And the low end is 1.2. That's not bad. So we can use these tools and say, should we double our budget of amplifiers, and will it get twice as good, right? So I guess we could check it out.
Exactly. So I'm just going to copy this source so we have our reference, and we'll paste this source below, which I'll do n parallel equals 1. And then we will change this to 1 enclosure per amplifier. So this resets our source, and we can calculate autofilter again. And when we're done, we can see the results here. So both on the Spl Target Window and the frequency response, we can see what this results gives. And if we swap between the two, you'll probably see almost no difference in the frequency response. So if we look at the figures, we have 1.2, 0.9, and 1.6. And if we go to n parallel equals 1, get 1.3, 0.8, and 1.5.
So it's practically the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
Practically the same. If we go between the two, you can see a slight difference in terms of the frequency response, a slight deviation in some places. But for the most part, it's almost the same.
So you could double your budget and achieve more or less no improvement or minor improvement. I mean, the only thing, it seems the high end is a little bit better. Is that right?
So we can see the high end's a little bit better, so it attenuates a little bit more in the near field because of the discretization. But is that worth twice as many amplifiers?
I suppose that's a really interesting choice now for the user, for the sound designer, is it worth that added value? Because honestly, I don't see a huge difference other than maybe the first 2 or 3 enclosures is the only place it seems to have significant, and by the first 2 or 3, I mean the bottom 2 or 3 of the array seems to be the only place.
Exactly. And what, again, just to add a little bit more into the mix, what's interesting is we can try that again with 3 enclosures.
Oh, wow.
And have a look at what that results gives. So we're looking at even less amplifiers driving this source. And this helps to drive the decision as to, do we need the extra amplifiers or don't we? So we can see here, if we go back from our single enclosure per amplifier, and I'm going to go to 3 enclosures per amplifier, and we can see there is a subtle difference.
But it's hard. Yeah, it's hardly different though, isn't it?
But if I bypass autofilter, so we see our initial starting point, we can still see how much this is bringing to the table.
Joachim, how come, like, it's been ingrained in me to have 10,000 DSP channels at all times to make everything perfect. What rules, what logic are in the algorithm that make that work and make it so consistent? Like, how did that come to be? Is it just a luck? Did you guys stumble upon something?
No. Actually, it's just physics. A simple way to say that, and I hope it will be simple, is just to consider that you need to have a high DSP resolution at frequencies where the size of the source is small. So, or the size of the frequency, the wavelength is small. So it's in the high frequencies. And this is the reason why, in Sam's example, the most difference that we can see is in the high frequencies. In the low frequencies, actually, whether you have 1, 2, or 3 enclosures per channel, it doesn't really change because they're already, their size, their cumulated size, it's already below the wavelengths of the corresponding frequency. So you don't need that resolution in these frequencies.
That's really interesting. So Sam, I could think of, we started out with a design that was n in parallel equals 2, which means we had 8 amplifiers. I'm just guessing here, but I bet we could maybe custom arrange those and maybe make the top couple of circuits 3 per, and we could probably do the bottom couple of boxes 1 each and get the best of all worlds here, have no extra cost yet better outcome. Is that also true?
That's absolutely true. So this is where, as a designer, it obviously takes a little bit more time to do, but in terms of getting the best result versus the best cost, it's the best compromise of both worlds, and it's very quick to do. One of the things that makes this so accessible is how quick Autofilter is to recalculate. You're not talking about 5 minutes, 10 minutes for a calculation just to optimize, which means you can iterate over the design to get to that end result. So just very quickly to show on this, we will do custom. So custom and parallel, and we will drive the top of the array in 3 enclosures per amp circuit, and then the bottom 4 on their own individual circuits.
So same number of circuits we did before.
So 8 amplifiers driving these 16 enclosures. And then now if we compare this to our n parallel equals 1.
Wow, it's more or less the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very similar on this.
So half as many amplifiers, and we get the same results. And I think the cool thing here is this is the same amplifier I was using a month or 2 ago, the LA12X. So there's no difference there. It took a firmware update for this to work. That was it.
That's correct. So this you can take advantage of this full range optimization on all of the current range of amplifiers. So the LA12X, LA4X, and LA2XI.
Wow. So if I have a project maybe I installed 6 months ago or 9 months ago, we installed some Cara, maybe some K3i, even I'm assuming A series with LA4X, LA12X. We can now go back and add this feature to it. There's nothing we have to do, correct?
Absolutely. So this is just a firmware upgrade and recalculating from Soundvision.
So Joachim, this can't possibly be free. So what does this cost us? Is it we just told you it's a free firmware upgrade. It works on the amplifiers you already have, but there must be a cost, right? There must be some penalty. Can you explain to us what do we have to sign over our firstborn child? Do we have to, what's another one here? Do we have to give away a car or a set of shoes?
So yes, there is a cost, and it's adding an extra latency of 2.7 milliseconds. This extra latency is due to the fact that we use a higher frequency or higher resolution FIR filters to achieve the best results in the low end. So whenever you activate the new full range autofilter, you will get an extra latency of 2.7 milliseconds, which in, I guess, most cases may not be problematic. And in some cases may be a problem. And maybe Sam, I guess, you could show how the different modes, how they work.
Absolutely. So obviously, Autofilter brings a lot to the table. And for the majority of applications, this additional latency should not be any concern at all. However, we can appreciate that there are some applications that cannot afford the additional latency. So it could be that it's a smaller theatre or smaller club venue, or it could just be that we have an artist that's very close to the system. Or the other way around, we might find that the front-end console has a lot of latency with it, with inserts, with hardboard, with outboard gear, and this adds to the latency of the system, so we need to be able to reduce this. And this is exactly what we've managed to incorporate into Soundvision. So we can see the results of the full optimization here. However, if we can't afford this, we can click on the Autofilter mode drop-down menu, and we can change this. So we have two other options. So we can simply bypass the LF filters, and effectively within Soundvision, this is just an easy tool to see what Autofilter is bringing to the table without affecting the latency. So we can click this, and we see we still have our HF optimization. However, back to the previous state that Autofilter brought us to. So this is useful just for comparing what we're bringing as a new feature. Or if we decide that we can't afford this additional latency, we can choose the reduced latency mode. And what this does is this actually disables the LF filters completely. So we can click this mode, and we see we get the same result. So we have our HF filters still active. We can see that these additional filters are not active here. But by selecting this mode, the latency of the source reverts back to the amplified unit standard latency, which is 3.84 milliseconds. What we have, because again, you may not be able to remember that, may not be a regular user of Soundvision, is if you're ever unsure, if you hover over this, you'll get a tooltip just to help you, just to remind you what these modes actually bring to the table. So we can see we can change the mode, and what we've also integrated with this is the latency of the amplified controller is accounted for when we go to delay mapping. So we can still optimize the time alignment of the system. If we decide later that we need to go into reduced latency autofilter mode, so we will change the latency of the amplified controllers, we can then still go into delay mapping mode and optimize the system so it's still ready before we get onto site.
So speaking of getting onto site, I can only imagine, Joachim, that the filters, the number of filters that are operating and the values we have to type into Network Manager is really complex, right? So how do we, there's tens or hundreds of values that need to be transmitted back and forth. I'm assuming my pencil is not the best way to do this. Is that right? We should probably automate this process back and forth.
Absolutely. So the good news is it's no different from what we currently do today. So just to demonstrate this, if we take our file back to a default state, so we have our arena file, we have our system visible there, and we can save our show here. Our design is ready for use. We can then open Network Manager and simply load the session, which may take a few seconds to load, and we see everything's imported onto the workspace. And actually, unless you need to do any customization, that's it. This is ready to use and start to test, start to tune on site. All of the filter values, all of this new auto filter mode has been imported, so it's just ready to work. And we'll demonstrate exactly where we can see this working and how to control it. So the first thing we've done is to add a dedicated autofilter view, just so you can see the state of autofilter working throughout the system. Sometimes it's important to know if you used full autofilter, if you've reduced the latency, or if you haven't used autofilter at all. So in the tuning page, we've added this autofilter view. And if we click on this, we can see very easily the state of autofilter. So for our main array and our side array, we see that everything is on. So this represents the full optimization. And you can see for our subsources and the unused channels of our side array that these are off. So this is, I would say, one of the first places to go if you've done any customization to your Network Manager session, because it gives us a very clear indication if an amplifier is not operating in the same mode as the rest within a source. So just to demonstrate, we can unassign a zoning group, and we can see very clearly that we have one amplifier that's not operating correctly. So this would give very weird sonic results. So I will add that there. The second thing we can do is we can actually change the autofilter mode from Network Manager. So once we've loaded our session, there's no reliance to have Soundvision open. If we get onto site and we find out that we can't afford this additional latency, we can change this from Network Manager. And so the place to do that is by selecting a source group. So we have our zoning groups, which are imported, and these contain the actual filters themselves. And we have the source group for every single source. And if we click on this, we see an additional control and the gain delay tab. So in the bottom right-hand corner, we get the autofilter active mode selection. And if we click on this, we get the same three modes that we saw in Soundvision. So it operates in the same way. And again, if we forget, we also have the same tooltip if you hover over this. So a helpful reminder on site on what this is doing. So we can change the mode from here. So if we bypass LF filters, very quickly, we get a visual indicator that something's changed when we're on our autofilter view. Again, this is helpful because it means if we do manually change something, we know exactly what has changed within the system. Another thing you may have noticed. Yep.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
No, please stop me. I'm going on.
I was gonna ask Joachim. So we could bypass and turn it on and off. You know, when I think of phase and amplitude and steering of lobes, I'm concerned that the impact of the system or the alignment of the system might be different, or it might feel different than it has in the past. Is that the case, or is the sonic results ultimately the same, like in the feeling of the sound?
Concerning the alignment, if you just bypass the filters, then the latency will remain the same. So if you have already aligned your main system with the subwoofers or with the side field, the alignment will remain the same, and you will be able to just listen to the effect of this new full-range autofilter, or compare with the standard HF autofilter. If you change to the disabled mode, then your alignment will not be the same. So you have to be careful about this part.
And so then we have to take into account the change primarily just in latency, right? But the actual transfer of the PA, the transfer function in terms of phase response and magnitude is the same. It's just a latency offset, more or less, correct?
For the bypass mode or for the disable mode?
Disable mode, pardon me. Sorry, disable
yes.
versus, yeah. So it's just, the change is really only a time function. It's not also, we're not seeing a huge shift in the way the system aligns with our sub. So I guess the question or the answer is, if we go back to a project we did 9 months ago and we apply autofilter, more or less we just have to apply that latency offset to the rest of the PA. Is that right, Sam?
That's correct. So effectively we have this additional time that autofilter introduces. So it's just a case of compensating for this additional time on the auxiliary sources.
Got it.
And we've actually, even within Network Manager, we've implemented just a dialog to remind users of this. So when you change the autofilter mode, if it's going to change the latency, we get a nice big indicator that you may need to realign with other elements of the system. However, it doesn't necessarily need to take all of the measurement again. Depending on how much time you have, you can simply just insert the timing offset to compensate.
Got it. And I suppose, too, the nicest thing about aligning a main to a sub at 50 hertz or 60 hertz is a millisecond or two is not a tragic issue if you have a good alignment to begin with. Right, Joachim, it's a pretty minimal difference in alignment at a millisecond or two. So if the heat of the battle, you're at a show and you forget to do that, it won't be a tragic consequence.
Yeah, completely, yes.
Good. Sam, I have one last question, and maybe this will be like our conclusion because I'm really concerned. We've done this great design. We did this a week in advance. We were planning for a show in the UK, and it was going to be a perfectly sunny day in June, in hot, of course, right? As you would expect in June in the UK, but it's June. So what happens when the weather changes tragically and you've done all these calculations and this optimization in advance a week before, and it turns out it's actually going to be really cold and wet, which I think is really atypical in June as well?
It's always wet. Let's start with that. Well, the nice thing is we can adapt to the atmospheric conditions very easily. So currently what we have and have had for a while in Network Manager is auto climate. And what this allows us to do is if we activate it, we can update the conditions. So let's say it's a very cold day, not too cold, but
there we go.
13 degrees. We have a fader which allows us to effectively slowly move this from our reference design conditions up to the current conditions. And this will adapt the air absorption filters to the current conditions. So we can do this effectively live throughout the show. We may find that we've, for example, you've done the sound check, you're happy, and before the audience comes in, you have time just to try and optimize the system a little bit more to the current conditions. So that's nice and easy. We can open our design file back again, and we need to recalculate using the updated conditions. So to change these atmospheric conditions, we click on the top right-hand corner where we see the conditions there, and it opens the options menu. We can now adjust the temperature and the hygrometry. And you see the minute we do that, we actually get a button that appears in the top right-hand corner. This tells us that one or more sources with autofilter don't match the current conditions. And using this one button, we can recalculate all sources in one go. So previously, we had to go through manually and update, and we could still do that. We can see if we click on the source, we get a little notification to tell us that this doesn't match the current conditions. Or we could just press the one button. So this may take a little bit longer to calculate as it's doing every source that has autofilter enabled. However, we see that it's still fairly quick to update. Once we've done that, it's as simple as saving the file, going back to Network Manager, and then choosing the Synchronize Zoning Groups function. We select our Soundvision project again, and then we get a nice dialog that tells us that this is successful. One thing to note, and we've put it in the dialog, is that the autofilter mode changes from the Soundvision file are not synchronized. So this is something that should be noted. The reason being is if we go back to the tuning page, you'll see I had this selected. We've tuned the system. We decided we couldn't afford the additional latency, so we went to the reduced latency mode, so it's HF filters only. Now, right before the show, when we update with the atmospheric conditions, we don't want to introduce any potential latency changes or anything by accident. So you notice in Soundvision, the mode is still default, so full optimization, but we don't update that in the synchronization. All the filters, though, are synchronized. So if at any point we decide we do want to go back to our full optimization, we get our dialog telling us there will be a latency change. And then all of the filters are those synchronized ones from Soundvision, so it's updated to the current atmospheric conditions.
last question I have, this is really great. Everyone can download it now. The Network Manager version that is out today can activate this. The Soundvision version you can get for Mac or PC is out today. Joachim, what sources does this work on?
It works on any full range source except the coaxial sources. So any curvature variable curvature line source or even a constant line source, such as the A series, is concerned by this new autofilter.
This is really great. I'm super excited about this, guys. I had a chance to hear it just this week, and it was quite incredible. The consistency and tonality at the front of the venue and the projection of the low end and the back is by far the best I've had to hear it. And I think most importantly, I felt like it got just a little bit quieter on stage, which was a pleasant surprise, and I was quite happy with that. So Sam, if people start using Autofilter and they're having a great time, how do they send you an email at what to tell you how amazing it is?
So effectively, send us emails to soundvision@L-Acoustics.com. We're always happy to hear the feedback. Was it good? Was it bad? Have you got pictures to show us? Anything at all is always good for us to hear. If it's suggestions on what you would like to see, obviously send these as emails. And of course, you can also tag L-Acoustics in various social media posts, tag Soundvision with designs. The more the better.
Fantastic. And Joachim, are you excited to go back to concerts this summer and hear Autofilter all over Europe? What's the first thing you're going to go see? Have you bought the tickets yet?
Actually, I went to some concerts weeks ago. I haven't planned any concert for the summer, but I'll let you tell me what concerts I will be concerned by Autofilter.
Excellent. So everyone, if you have a show that's going to use Autofilter and you want Joachim or Sam to come, go ahead and tag it in social media. Say Soundvision, L-Acoustics, come check out my show. Please post in the comments below if you've already used Autofilter, and if you're excited to use it, we're excited to hear from you. Sam, Joachim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
All right, everyone at home, goodbye, be well, be safe, and go Autofilter. Cheers.